People aren't the ones who dictate the missions.
Then who does?
The times. People's values change over time. The only thing we can believe in with absolute certainty is the mission, Jack.
Hey guys, it's Critical Fish here, and with this video, I wanted to bring up a discussion surrounding Metal Gear Solid Delta. Now, if you don't know, this is the latest release in the Metal Gear Solid series. It is a remake slash remaster of the original Metal Gear Solid 3, and I'm not going to be reviewing the game, but I am going to be talking about the impact of its existence, why Konami is even doing this in the first place, and what it means for the future of the Metal Gear series. So I want to reiterate that this is not a review of Metal Gear Solid Delta because I'm actually not even playing the game right at launch. I have my own reasons for doing so, and I will explain exactly why I'm not buying it right at launch. But before I do that, I want to share the three main topics of this video. Each of these topics actually relates to the boss and her principles and knowledge that she shares to Snake within Metal Gear Solid 3. I think the boss is a very visionary character, she's a strong leader, and she tries to teach Snake things either directly or indirectly throughout the story of Metal Gear Solid 3. And I'm going to be relating some of her teachings and values to the actual situation regarding Metal Gear Solid Delta. The boss's first value that I'm going to tie into the situation is that she thinks enemies and allies shift over time. And I'm going to be relating this to how the fans feel about Konami as a company and publisher of the Metal Gear franchise. The second point that I want to bring up is how the boss ties loyalty to purpose and making sure that personal transformation happens correctly. I'm going to be tying this to how the developers chose to either keep things the same or tweak and change small things over the course of this remake. And the third point that I'm going to be talking about from the boss is that consequences have a ripple effect through history. And I'm going to be tying this into how fans are going to view the future of the Metal Gear series and question whether or not Konami is setting up room for future remakes to happen or even new games in the series to happen, even though the original creator of the series, Hideo Kojima, is no longer with the company. So let's touch back on why I'm not playing Metal Gear Solid Delta and why this isn't a review of the game. I was someone that was watching the initial reveal trailer of Metal Gear Solid Delta back in either 2022 or 2023. I was actually very interested in the hype surrounding the game and the news that this was going to be a remake for PlayStation 5 fans and Xbox Series fans to play in just a matter of time. At this point, I had no clue what Metal Gear Solid was about. I knew that he was in Super Smash Bros. And I knew that he was kind of a military shooter guy. I just didn't have the context of what the games were about and, what Hideo Kojima had created over the course of a decade. So right after this reveal, there was fans saying praises and negative things about the game. I kind of stepped back and didn't really think about Metal Gear for a while once the reveal had passed. It was only after the game was showcased a couple more times that I kind of formed my own opinion that, hey, this is technically the third game in the series. Maybe I don't want to play the games chronologically, and I should give the original Metal Gear Solid 1 and 2 a shot. So, with some push from my friend, I actually went ahead and played Metal Gear Solid 1, Metal Gear Solid 2, and then I actually changed my mind and played the entirety of Metal Gear Solid 3 before knowing, the release date of Metal Gear Solid Delta. So, since then, I have a pretty solid understanding of the games in the series, the context as to the original creators of the game, and I see the series in a very different light now that I know that Konami is kind of a company that owns the IP and doesn't really have any creative influence over the IP. There's a lot of fans that remain loyal to Hideo Kojima and the fact that he was the creator of the series and that Konami really doesn't have any influence over what the games turned out to be. They're fan favorites, but, Konami doesn't create the games. That was kind of Kojima and his team at Konami. All of this is very interesting backstory to the situation regarding Delta now, because if you look at Delta as a fresh fan or an old fan, you can clearly see that this is a one-to-one kind of stripping of the original game. Some may call it faithful, others will call it lazy, and all of the aspects regarding this remake are going to be broken down and analyzed over the course of the rest of this video. So coming straight from the boss's mouth, the first principle wisdom viewpoint is that enemies and allies shift over time. The year is 2025, and the last mainline game in the Metal Gear Solid franchise was released back in 2015. That is Kojima's last Metal Gear Solid project, and since that point he has left to go create his own games with his own team in his new independent studio. Konami, on the other hand, has released one Metal Gear Solid game in the past 10 years, and it got very negative reception because it was just really not that good. It was an online multiplayer game with not much heart. There was a lot of microtransactions. It's not even worth talking about. But that's pretty much all they've done since Kojima left the studio. So there's a question of whether or not Konami is an ally or an enemy of the fans, because they haven't done anything with the IP. They kind of disrespected the IP and the legacy regarding what the original games were. There was a huge joke about Hideo Kojima not being welcomed to accept his prize at the Game Awards back in 2016 or 2015, I want to say. And ever since then, just the idea that Konami is a great company that published Metal Gear Solid has really changed. There has been no good Metal Gear Solid representation up until this point, where Metal Gear Solid 3 is supposedly coming back, and the fact that they might be re-releasing the original games like they did with Metal Gear Solid 1, 2, and 3. And I don't know. I don't know how I feel about Konami as a company. Obviously, they own the IP, so it's fair for them to release the games, but will the fans continue to enjoy what this means? I don't know. Personally, I've seen a lot of divide between people saying this is a straight up rip-off, it's a soulless remake in Unreal Engine 5, and there's just a lot of criticism regarding the game. But however, recently, a lot of fans and reviewers of the game came out and said, yep, this is a really solid remastering of Metal Gear Solid 3. There's some much needed changes within the remake. Overall, though, I'm not sure if it's a replacement or if it's even essential in the first place. So, I think overall, Metal Gear Solid Delta Snake Eater is going to be a pretty safe bet. I think a lot of people will have their first introduction to Metal Gear with this game, which is kind of what I initially planned, but I don't know. It's up to the people to decide whether or not they're interested in playing and learning about Metal Gear Solid. The second point that I'm touching on now is that loyalty should be tied to a purpose, and that changes over time or personal transformations are kind of inevitable. This is going to be related to how the developers decided to either keep things the same or slightly tweak and change things over the course of this remake project. Now, as a lot of you may know, a remake is very different from a remaster, but a remake has a spectrum that it can kind of fall under. You can remake a game extremely faithfully, put it in a new engine, really showcase what the original was like, but have some much needed changes here and there. That falls on the kind of lower end of the spectrum of a remake, while as on the other end, you can look at a game like Final Fantasy VII Remake or Resident Evil 2 Remake and see that that is a complete re-envisioning of what the original is and how it could be changed for modern times to really blow you away and give you a much newer experience. And I would say that Delta, despite the fact that Delta means changes and adaptations, I think it does remain extremely similar to the original game, for better and for worse. One of those original decisions that I noticed is that when Snake transitions from one section of the map to another, there is still a cut to black fade sequence that you as the player have to witness a loading screen for. And I just don't even think you need that in today's age, where they could have made the levels tie into each other directly. I personally feel like you didn't even need to be that faithful to change stuff like that. That's just one example though. There's a lot of small tweaks here and there, but for the most part, Delta is extremely faithful to the original game, and the developers chose to leave it that way. They have the original voice actors, they have the original level design. They did not change the names of weapons or the characters. They did not change motives. They really didn't change anything at all. So it's kind of bold for them to call this a remake. But again, like I said, because remakes fall on a spectrum, this technically is a remake from the ground up of what Metal Gear Solid 3 was. And in some ways, I would say they stayed too faithful to the original. I think there was definitely some bigger opportunities to make some big changes, whether that's level design or new voice actors and stuff like that. This would have been their opportunity to really shake up the original game. I'll play devil's advocate though, because recently a developer came out and said that this was originally just a simple remaster of Metal Gear Solid 3. And if they made the distinguished change in the development to say, we don't want to do a remaster, we want to do a remake because some of this stuff feels extremely outdated. I'm fair with that perspective, and I'm glad that they kind of went more than just doing a remaster, because ultimately they did change some things within this game, whether that's controls or camera or visual aesthetic of the game. I'm glad that they kind of went above just a remaster, but they were kind of very loyal to what this game originally looked like and played like and sounded like. So there's good and bad to it. If you're a fan of the original game, their idea was probably, hey, this won't upset you. This is kind of a safe one-to-one recreation of what we saw when it was released back in the day. So you're not going to be upset. In fact, you're going to be very happy to re-experience it in new light. But some fans are not happy that they didn't change enough. You can't please everybody. But the big third talking point that I wanted to bring up in this video is that the boss mentions consequences have ripple effects throughout history. This was a story setup within the game to prepare you for the rest of the Metal Gear Solid storyline. All the consequences of the boss, Big Boss, Ocelot, Zero, characters like that make a huge lasting impact for the rest of the storyline of the games. But in real life, the consequence of this remake could either be a great thing or a terrible thing. From what I can tell, because reviews are strong, because people are relatively receptive and excited to play this, it's mostly positive. It's mostly a good thing that Konami is bringing back Metal Gear Solid. On the flip side, this remake was challenged with bringing back Metal Gear Solid in a positive light. And the biggest way they figured out how to do that was with not changing much. that kind of tells me that the team and the developers over at Konami just don't have that same creative vision or confidence to make changes, to make big moves with this series. They're kind of just showcasing that they can do it again. They can push out what people already like, and they might not have that creative vision. So the ripple effect that I'm talking about is with the fact that this is now called Metal Gear Solid Delta. Changes. It's a green logo for this game, but it could be a blue logo for Metal Gear Solid 2. It could be a red logo for Metal Gear Solid 1 Remake. So there's options open for Konami and for the teams at Konami right now to say, Delta turned out great. We want to go forward, double down on Metal Gear Solid coming back, and make some big changes to Metal Gear Solid 1, and then we can make Metal Gear Solid 2. And who knows where that would go from there. Maybe they do 4, maybe they do 5, maybe they make another entry in the series. And just that idea is crazy because Kojima, again, is not there. 4 was supposed to be the ending of the series, but they ended up making 5 as kind of a bonus game in the series. But would it be smart for this team of developers that didn't change much from the original Metal Gear Solid 3 to have a lot more creative vision for Metal Gear Solid 1? I feel like that opens up a whole nother can of worms, because then they're responsible for new voice lines, new level design, new animations within cutscenes. There's a lot more work that would have to be done with other installments in the Metal Gear franchise, and I'm not sure personally if they can do it or if they want to do that. I don't know. It's an interesting thing to think about. And if in 2030 there's a Metal Gear Solid 1 remake that releases on the PlayStation 6, there's going to be a lot more conversation surrounding that than I think this Delta remake would ever spark. And that's why the thumbnail shows money bags under Metal Gear Solid 1, because let me tell you, I can place bets. Metal Gear Solid 1 remake in 2030 could be unbelievable, or it could be a disaster like how Metal Gear Solid the Twin Snakes turned out to be. So ultimately, that kind of wraps up all the topics that I wanted to touch on in this video. But coming from a guy who calls himself Critical Fish, I'm actually pretty optimistic for the future of this series. I don't think that there will be more original games, but I do think that there are solid shots at remakes to come into the scene. Whether or not they're good will be a whole nother question and discussion, but I would be pretty excited to see Metal Gear Solid 1 get a full next generation remake with some creative leverage, of course. But let me know what you guys think. Did you understand the fact that I was tying the boss's values to the discussion regarding this game? What do you think about Metal Gear Solid Delta? Would you rather just have the originals? Are you looking forward to future remakes? I want to know in the comments, because this is a growing discussion and I'm here to talk about Metal Gear Solid for the foreseeable future as long as it stays relevant. Besides that, guys, have a great one and stay critical.